Last weekend it was cold and rainy. I decided it was perfect for beef stew. So I'm going to show you how I do it. These are the ingredients I use. The only thing I forgot to put out was the vegetable oil. The first thing I do is take a cup or so of flour and add salt and pepper to it. And then I mix it around. This is what I'm going to dredge the stew meat in before I brown it on the stove. Then I'm going to heat up some vegetable oil. I just kind of put enough in there to cover the bottom of the pan. And I put it, I think normally on medium to medium high. And once it's hot enough, I start to brown the meat. And I'm not cooking it through in this step. I'm just kind of browning all sides of it, because it'll finish cooking in the slow cooker. So I just keep browning the meat in batches until they're brown on both sides. And then once I have it all done, I remove them to a paper towel lined plate so they can drain a little bit before I add them to the slow cooker. Now it's time to add the chopped onions. These are frozen. It's just easier than cutting an onion. And I just kind of eye how much I put in. It's roughly about, I think, as much as like a medium onion would be. And I just brown it in the same pan that the meat was just cooked in. Then I add the beef and onions to my slow cooker. Now I have my potatoes and carrots all chopped up and ready to go in. I think I ended up using 4 of the potatoes and about 4 carrots. And I just kind of put them right in the slow cooker and stir everything together. Now it's time to add the beef stock, and I usually eye this as well. It's roughly about 3 cups of beef stock, I believe. I kind of wait till it's coming up towards the top of all the ingredients that are in there, so I can kind of just see it. And that's usually when I stop. Now I'm just going to put the lid on and cook on low. The mushrooms will be added later on. I'll show that step when I get to it. This is about 2 hours after I started cooking it, and it's all starting to simmer and smell really good. I don't use any spices, just salt and pepper. You can definitely add different spices if you want. Here's another ingredient I forgot to show at the beginning. These are the best rolls, and they are frozen, so you need to lay them out so that they can thaw out and rise a little bit. So I just spray a baking dish and I add as many as I'm gonna want. Usually I think I fit about 12 in here. They are really the best rolls. So they're gonna sit covered. I think it says to cover them with saran wrap, but I always just lay a paper towel over them. And they're just gonna sit out for 3 to 4 hours until they're ready to bake when the stew's about done. So I let my stew cook on low for about 6 hours. I just want to make sure the stew meat is nice and tender. And about an hour before I think it's going to be ready, I browned the mushrooms in some butter, salt and pepper them as well, and get them all cooked so that I can add them to the stew for the final hour. Definitely, you don't have to add mushrooms to stew, but we love mushrooms in our house, so I always do add them. Another thing I do at this point is I take about a cup of the broth out before I add the mushrooms. And I'm going to stick this in the fridge because I need it to cool down. I will add some flour to it when it's cooled and whisk it together so that I can add it back into the stew. And this is what helps thicken the stew. Okay, now the mushrooms are in the stew and I'm just going to stir them in there, put the lid back on and let it cook for another hour, roughly about another hour, and then I'm going to add that cooled off broth with the flour in it. Okay, the broth is all cooled off, so I take about a tablespoon of flour and whisk it with a fork until it's incorporated into the cooled off broth. It's important to make sure the broth is cooled off first because if you try to add the flour to hot broth, it just creates lumps. Now I'm just going to add it to the stew and stir it around. The stew is pretty much done at this point, but now we just need the slurry, I think is what it's called. We need it to heat through, and it really does a good job of thickening the stew. So it is really almost done, and this is usually when I test the taste to see if it needs more salt and pepper. Like I said earlier, you can add different spices, but this is just how we like it. I've experimented in the past with adding different herbs and spices, but I think we just seem to prefer it with just good old salt and pepper. Now these rolls are ready to cook. They take about 15 to 20 minutes in the oven, and they just come out so beautifully golden brown, and they're so good with the stew. So here is the finished stew in the bowl, ready to eat.